Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Xiaolin Perspectives. And today we're going to be discussing episode 9 of Xiaolin Showdown, My Homey. And so this episode begins the way that most Xiaolin Showdown adventures begin, with a Shengong Wu revealing itself. In this case, this particular Shengong Wu is called the Serpent's Tail, which is a literal serpent's tail that, as Dojo describes it, is a Shengong Wu that's always on the move. Basically, if you're holding onto the serpent's tail, it can pretty much just fly you high speeds anywhere, and by extension, it can make you ghostly, allowing you to pass through physical objects. The only problem, though, is that this particular Shengong Wu, once it revealed itself, apparently became very active, as now it's just flying all over the place where it was hidden, and so finding it is a little hard to do. Which wouldn't be that hard, except it turns out this particular Shengong Wu is in New York City, the city that never sleeps and is very easy to get lost in. So essentially finding the serpent's tail in the city is like finding a needle in a haystack. Thankfully, because Dojo is essentially a Shengong Wu detector, he's able to guide the Xiaolin Monks somewhat through New York City to find the Serpent's Tail, and they even get a lock on it. Unfortunately, because of how fast this thing moves, Dojo's Shengong Wu sense, so to speak, can't exactly zero in on it. So to try and supplement this, the Xiaolin Monks try using the Falcon's Eye, since it can see through solid objects. Unfortunately, Kimiko Kimiko sees more than she wants to see, as she ends up seeing a guy picking his nose in his apartment, and so Homey takes the Falcon's Eye and starts looking for the Shengong Wu, which he ends up finding it underground and then races after it. Unfortunately, he moves too far ahead of the group, and so while the other Xiaolin Monks try keeping up with him, thanks to unfortunately getting stuck in a crosswalk, they end up losing sight of Homey, and Dojo quickly loses the Serpent's Tail. And so the group is unfortunately separated from Homey, with Homey eventually realizing he's lost them after he loses the Serpent's Tail, which he only loses because he runs into a wall. I guess that's what happens when you're looking down and not forward. But either way, though, both groups are now worried for the other, with Homey thinking that that his friends won't be able to survive in New York City without him, while the other Xiaolin Monks think the opposite, which is, again, makes sense. Homey is very high of himself, and the other Xiaolin Monks aren't stupid. But unfortunately, though, trouble kind of comes on both sides, as Homey tries asking all the locals if they can find his friends, but it's New York. Nobody wants to help Homey. In fact, the first guy he yells just tells him to go back to Jersey, and the second person he talks to is a woman who gets freaked out by Homey so much that she threatens to mace him. And the third guy Homey meets, he's just a quack. He's just a quack. In other words, your typical New Yorkers. However, Homey eventually does kind of find a break, so to speak, as he winds up finding himself at a basketball court where he sees these three punks just playing basketball, and Homey just thinks, Homey thinks that they're trying out some new form of kung fu because he's never seen basketball before. So he tries to rush into the game to talk to him, only to accidentally get swapped out with a ball and thrown into a hoop. And unfortunately, the punks that were playing basketball aren't very friendly, and so start threatening Homey, with Homey quickly picking up that these guys mean to do him harm. However, before a fight can break out between the Xiaolin Monk and these three idiots, Homey gets some unexpected help from a local local kid basically from New York, basically an African-American youth by the name of Jermaine, who basically can talk a big game, and while he does put up somewhat of a good fight, ultimately Homey and him kind of help each other out and manage to scare the punks off. As such, Homey at least realizes that Jermaine is friendly, though when he tries explaining to Jermaine who he is, because Jermaine can tell he's not from New York, Jermaine thinks he's a little crazy. Now, Jermaine doesn't actually say that he thinks Homey's nuts, but the way he reacts to when Homey tells him what he's doing in New York, you can tell he thinks that Homey's nuts. Basically, every time Homey says, when Homey says he's a Xiaolin monk here to find a mystical Shengong Wu in New York, Jermaine's like, yeah, right. It's like he can tell that there's a part of his mind that there's somewhere in his head that's going, okay, this kid's kind of nuts. But he at least knows that Homey means no harm, and so he does try to humor him somewhat and does help him out. He even gets him a new change of clothes so that he doesn't stand out in his monk robes. As such, in the meantime, though, back with the other Xiaolin monks, they end up eventually running into Jack Spicer, as you do, and after dealing with some of his robots, they end up chasing him into a subway, because that's apparently where the Serpent's Tail is. And sure enough, they do see the Serpent's Tail flying through the subway, with Jack in hot pursuit riding on a train that's pretty much one of his new robots, a shape-shifting robot. And no, it's not a chameleon. I mean, it just turns from a train to a giant robot form, but essentially a transformer. As such, the Xiaolin monks end up chasing after him on Dojo, who turns into a train himself, and eventually the chase ends up leading them, coincidentally, right to the basketball court where Homey and Germain are, with the Serpent's Tail flying out of the sky and Jack coming up after it with his robot. With it, as such, Jack's robot manages to grab the Serpent's Tail, and he decides to try and get one more win in as he ends up sending its lasers to shoot at Homey. However, before he can land a killing blow, that's when Dojo flies up with the other monks, and after he tries getting off all the excess heat from, riding the rails underground, he basically the other monks are happy to be reunited with Homey, with Jack end up losing his grip on the Serpent's Tail, as when Dojo flew out of the ground, he knocked Jack's robot over and, well, like I said, lost its grip. As such, everyone immediately starts making a mad scramble for the Serpent's Tail as it just flies all over the court. And eventually, Homey manages to dive at it and he grabs the Serpent's Tail by its, well, tail. Unfortunately, though, Jack managed to grab it from the front, so, Xiaolin showdown time. With Jack, in this case, Jack challenges Homey to a game of basketball. 1-on-1, 10 minutes on the clock, and whoever has the most points by the end wins. Only problem is, Homey doesn't know how to play basketball, so he'd be kind of going in with a handicap. However, Germain, who's now seeing all the craziness up front, says that he can play basketball. He can just put him in the game. Unfortunately, because Germain didn't make a grab of the Shengang Wu, he can't actually be a part of the showdown. And as such, Homey and Jack do start to discount him until Homey thinks of a way that he can bring Germain in. In this case, he challenges Jack to a Shenyi Bu Dare, with the added stipulation that it goes from 1-on-1 to 2-on-2, with Homey and Germain versus Jack and another opponent of his choosing, with Jack choosing the giant-ass robot because Wuya can do jack shit. As such, Jack ends up wagering his Jetbutsu and the Shroud of Shadows, and Homey ends up wagering the Mantis Flip Coin and the Falcon's Eye, since those are the only usable Shengang Wu they have on standby. And so, rules set in place, Xiaolin showdown time. And again, awesome effects immediately ensue, as the area gets covered in mist, and the basketball court gets flown into fucking space, with even the tar on the basketball court just crumbling away, only leaving the chalk outlines and the hoops. And again, I can't even kind of bring it all home, they end up just seeing all these phantom windows of what looks like buildings from New York just floating all around them. And again, kind of another thing, again, like I mentioned how when the Xiaolin Showdown begins, the good guys end up swapping into their monk robes. Well, now Germain's wearing his own monk robes. Shows he's one of the good guys. And what I also love, Germain immediately regrets taking part in this, as he's like, I did not think this was going to happen. I think I made a mistake. But unfortunately, it's too little too late. The Xiaolin Showdown commences, and so the Serpent's Tail turns into a basketball and a scoreboard materializes. So immediately, the game is on. And while there is a bit of a learning curve, as Homey's never played this game and Germain is kind of still getting used to everything that's happening around him, well, eventually, things start kind of going well, as Jack and his robot do manage to get a few points, but Homey manages to counter using the Mantis Flip Coin and gets his own points, and Germain starts getting more into the game of it. And so Homey and Germain start coordinating better, and it actually does turn into a better basketball game. Unfortunately, though, both sides are kind of neck and neck with one another, with the Heilin side always just a few points ahead of the Xiaolin side. And again, what I love is that on the sidelines is Wuya and the Xiaolin monks rooting for their teams. Eventually, though, the match gets tied 28-28 with only 1 minute left on the clock. And of course, Germain and Homey think they're doing a good job, only for Jack to come in and use his robot to squash Germain. No, he doesn't kill him, he just holds him in place, just long enough for Jack to grab the basketball. However, Germain is able to give Homey a heads up, as Homey earlier in the battle lended him a Mantis Flip Coin, so he throws it back to Homey, and so using the Mantis Flip Coin, he's able to intercept Jack before he can land a final hoop, knock Jack out, and grab the basketball himself before throwing it in his hoop. And so the timer counts down with the Xiaolin monks getting with 30 points and the Heilin side having 28. And so Homey and Germain have won the showdown, and everything gets reverted back to normal, with Jack thinking he got robbed and Wuya chewing him out. But either way, The good guys have won. They now have 3 more Shengang Wu than they had before, and Homey is happy for Germain's help, with Germain complimenting Homey for his skills. As such, from there, the episode ends as the Xiaolin Monks ride on Dojo, who says he senses another Shengang Wu that we never see, and Homey offering Germain the chance to come back to the temple with them, as he thinks Germain has skill. However, Germain declines the offer. New York is his home, and he can't just abandon it all to go train in China, but he does still consider Homey a friend and tells him that next time he's in New York to look him up. And so, the Xiaolin Monks fly away with Homey telling Germain to peace on, before he's told it means it's actually peace off. Peace off. But either way, that's the episode. So, my thoughts on it. I think this is actually a pretty good episode. If I want to get into the technicals with the whole world building and the Shengang Wu, let's talk about the Serpent's Tail. I think it's a pretty cool Shengang Wu. Again, it's not one of my favorite Shengang Wu, but it's a pretty damn good one. This is a Shengang Wu that essentially, once you activate it, nothing can stop you. Yeah, you can't interact with things, but it can get you places quicker than you want to, or quicker than you would think to, and because it can go through walls, nothing can stop you. Once this thing is activated, you're essentially just a ghost train with no stops on the way. It's, again, pretty damn cool. I like it. And believe it or not, the Serpent's Tail becomes very important later on. I'm not going to get into details now, but needless to say, this thing is going to be an integral piece of the puzzle later. But either way, yeah, still a cool Shengang Wu. On top of that, I like the plot of the episode. For one thing, this is one of the first few episodes. This is one of the first episodes where, rather than the Shengang Wu just being a stationary object that everyone has to race to get, this Shengang Wu is always on the move. And while it's still a battle between who can find it first, it's interesting to see. It's interesting that because the Shengang Wu is always on the move, everybody always has to adapt and try and just be careful and look at every nook and cranny just to see if they can get a hint of it. And even if they find it, catching it is a completely different thing. Again, at the end of the day, they still have to grab it, but because this Shengang Wu is as active even without a user, it actually makes it a more interesting challenge to see. Made better by the fact that it's in fucking New York, the city that never sleeps. It's always crowded. There's always something going on. Even in the episode, they state that it's very easy to lose someone here, and even if you tried finding them, that's easier said than done. And so basically, not only do they have to worry about a Shengang Wu that's always on the move, but because everything is so crowded, it's also very easy to lose should they find it. So it actually does make for an interesting challenge, and does kind of make you want to see how they manage to get the Shengang Wu by the end. So I give you that. That's actually some good stuff. On top of that, this episode is another good episode for Homey. But once again, he's put in the forefront of everything, and for his character development, it's essentially him kind of diversifying, so to speak. Like I said, one of Homey's big problems is that because he's been sheltered in the temple his whole life, he doesn't really understand the outside world, with the other Xiaolin monks being his first real connection to it. But here's the episode where he finally is alone in the outside world, and he kind of just has to adapt. Now, ultimately, his already present arrogance makes him think, oh, I can deal with this all, no problem. But the thing is, he doesn't know his stuff. The case in point, let's talk about New York. Now, I've never been to New York, so I openly admit that everything that I have heard about is just from other people. But from what I have heard, New York is not a very welcoming place. It's crowded, everybody's going somewhere, and you always have to be on your guard because you never know if the person you're running into means to do you harm or is just a random passerby. So when when Homey starts venturing around New York and wants to try and get his bearings, well, when he tries acting friendly to people, it's essentially playing to the wrong crowd. People aren't going to be very hospitable to him, and even when he does try talking with everyone, they very much are. Hold on one second. They're very much confrontational. Sorry, I was blanking on the word. And so, Homey is obviously kind of dealing with an uphill battle, especially when the first person that he does run into that actually is being friendly and not confrontational he's not well, because it's a crazy guy in a lab coat with worn out shoes and wearing a light bulb on his head. So again, it feels even more alien, which is ironic considering that the guy actually said that aliens are among them. So it's clear. So Homey is kind of out of his element throughout the episode. Even when he encounters the punks playing basketball, rather than immediately sensing that these guys might be have a bit more attitude, he just goes in and thinks, "Hello, friends. Can you show me what's going on here?" Which almost nearly gets his ass kicked. Nearly. It's made perfectly clear that Homey probably could have handled them on his own. But again, he was approaching people with friendly intent who already weren't friendly. So again, his instincts weren't always that good. But at the very least, it is interesting to kind of see Homey step into it, and what helps him do that is Germain. Now, to my knowledge, Germain only appears in 2 episodes in the series. This episode and a later one in season 2. But Germain immediately kind of ingratiates himself to the audience, because while he has the attitude that you would expect a kid from New York to have, he also clearly has a good heart, as he immediately steps up to defend Homey without really any prompting, and once everything is settled, and once they manage to scare off the punks, he's immediately friendly to Homey, talks to him, actually, and despite the fact that you can tell that he thinks that Homey's not exactly well in the head, he at least tries to humor him, as he helps him out, as he helps him get used to New York, gets him to a change of clothes so he doesn't stand out as much. And so while it's kind of implied that he doesn't fully believe Homey's story about being a Xiaolin monk here to find a mystical Shen Gong Wu, at the same time, you can tell that Germain thinks that Homey is a cool guy. He can definitely fight, he clearly has a good heart, so Germain at least wants to give Homey some benefit of the doubt. So, and ultimately, that benefit of the doubt is rewarded, as seconds after Germain helps Homey start looking for the Shen Gong Wu, the Shen Gong Wu reveals itself to both of them, and so he's like, oh, okay, he was telling the truth, and that giant robot must be the bad guy. So, again, I like that. And throughout the episode, Germain is honestly just a pretty cool kid. He tries to help the Shaolin warriors grab the Shen Gong Wu. He volunteers to take part in the Shaolin showdown just to help Homey keep this very powerful object away from the clearly crazy kid with the robot. And while he does end up regretting some of his decisions when he ends up actually in the Shaolin showdown, he acclimates to the environment rather well, and immediately just goes, okay, now I know what we're doing, and he just treats it like a basketball game, despite the fact that they're in space. Again, it's some good stuff, and you can definitely feel that there's a connection between him and Homey. I'm not going to say their friendship is like the greatest thing ever, but at the very least, you can tell that they click like friends, and that if they spent more time together, you could probably see a development growing. As Germain definitely has the patience that the other Xiaolin monks have, but he's open-minded as well, and it does allow him to immediately come across as a very likable kid who definitely having punk tendencies, definitely ultimately has a good heart and wants to help out wherever he can. It's nice, and I dig it, and I like the connection between Germain and Homey. And of course, the ending is still really good. I love the showdown. Again, this one. I can say this. I think this is one of my favorite showdowns in the series. It's not just the fact that it's a game of basketball, because I'm not really much of a sports guy, but I loved how the environment changed for this one. How very unique and alien it was, which again is ironic considering it's in space. But I do think it's a really cool one, and so I do think it really works. So I think it works well in that regard. And it's just a visual masterpiece with having it be a literal basketball game in space, plus the fact that it's actually a Xiaolin showdown in a city. So, again, fun stuff all around. I'm trying to think, was there something else I liked? To my knowledge, everything I described is probably all I can really think of the episode, but there is maybe one other thing that I would like to talk about in terms of what I think worked for the episode. It's a small thing, but it's when the Xiaolin monks manage to find Homey again, and as one of the first people that ends up being happy that they found Homey was Raimundo, who immediately just runs up to Homey and pulls him in for a hug and says, "Don't you ever do this, we were worried about you." It's a small thing, but it's again another little sign that shows that Raimundo, despite how flippant he can be, does care about the job and his friends. So again, it's a little thing, but I dig it. Yeah, of course, the action is still fun, and it's still cool to see the Xiaolin monks kicking ass and doing things. There's still some good humor where they need to be, and just I can't really really much else to the episode. It's a pretty straightforward episode, and the real meat and potatoes of it is just Omi exploring New York, trying to, and then experiencing an environment that he's unfamiliar with and having to adapt to it. By meeting a friend in Jermaine who helps him out, even though he doesn't fully believe his story, and then finally through that connection, he's able to achieve a win as Jermaine helps him get the Serpent's Tail, and by extension the Jet Butsu in the Shroud of Shadows. It's, again, some nice stuff. Combine that with an honestly fun idea with the Serpent's Tail and the chase throughout it. I think it's overall just a fun episode, and the ending of the episode at least gives you enough warm fuzzies as Omi and Jermaine wish each other well before they part ways. It's honestly some good stuff. I admit it's probably not an amazing episode, but I think it's still a pretty good and nice one. It definitely has enough warm, definitely hits you in the right spot right here with Omi and Jermaine's friendship. So on the whole, I think My Homey Omi is a pretty damn good episode. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.